Old woman cashes out 100-year worth of rare coins. What she got is truly shocking. Eleanor Whitmore ran her fingers over the velvet-lined box, feeling each coin's unique ridges beneath her fingertips. At 78, her hands weren't as steady as they once were, but they still remembered the weight of each piece in her collection. The morning light caught the edge of an 1804 silver dollar, the crown jewel of her inheritance, making it gleam as if winking at her. "Are you absolutely certain about this, Mom?" her daughter Melissa asked, concern etched across her face. "These coins have been in our family for generations. Your grandfather would understand," Eleanor interrupted gently. "Some things are worth more than money, dear." The collection had started with her great-grandfather, a bank teller who saved unusual coins during the late 1800s. Through the Great Depression, 2 world wars, and countless family hardships, the Whitmores had preserved the growing collection. Eleanor had inherited it from her father when she was 30, and for nearly 50 years, she'd continued the tradition. Experts had valued the collection at over $3 million, enough to set up her grandchildren for life. Melissa had already mapped out how they could invest the money, secure Eleanor's retirement, and maybe even buy that lake house they'd always dreamed about. But Eleanor had other plans. "The taxi should be here any minute," Eleanor said, adjusting her pearl necklace. "Did you print those donation papers I asked for?" Melissa sighed, handing over a manila envelope. "Yes, but I still think you should reconsider. The 1913 Liberty Head nickel alone could set up Timothy's college fund." Eleanor smiled, thinking of her grandson. "Timothy will have plenty of opportunities. What he needs more is to see history preserved, to understand that some things belong to everyone." The taxi horn honked outside, and Eleanor carefully lifted the case containing over 200 coins spanning American history. She'd spent the previous night saying goodbye to each one, polishing them one last time. The Stratford History Museum wasn't imposing like grand museums in major cities. Housed in a converted Victorian mansion, it had charm but lacked proper funding. As the taxi pulled up, Eleanor noticed the "reduced hours" sign that hadn't been there during her last visit. The stone steps seemed more cracked, and the once vibrant flower beds now contained more weeds than blooms. Inside, the marble-floored foyer echoed with emptiness. Where school groups once chattered excitedly, there was only silence. "Mrs. Whitmore!" "Right on time." Arthur Langley emerged from his office, his tall frame slightly stooped. At 55, the museum director had a distinguished salt-and-pepper beard and wire-rimmed glasses. "I can't tell you how much I've been looking forward to our meeting." Eleanor smiled. "The museum seems quiet today, Arthur." "Unfortunately, it's quiet most days now. Budget cuts, reduced tourism. We've had to let go of 3 staff members last month alone." He gestured toward his office. "Please come in." Arthur's office reflected the museum's decline. Papers were stacked haphazardly, and the antique desk that had once gleamed now looked dull under fluorescent lighting. Save Stratford History poster hung crooked on one wall. "I'll be direct, Arthur," Eleanor said after settling into a worn leather chair. "I've been watching this museum struggle for some time now. It breaks my heart." Arthur sighed. "The city council has slashed our funding again. They're voting next month on whether to close us entirely and sell the building to developers." His voice cracked slightly. 30 years I've dedicated to this place, and they want to replace it with luxury condominiums." Eleanor placed the mahogany case on his desk and unlatched it. "Then perhaps this might help." Arthur's eyes widened as she opened the lid, revealing rows of meticulously arranged coins. "My God!" he whispered. "Is that a 1794 flowing hair dollar?" "It is indeed," Eleanor confirmed. "Along with an 1895 Morgan silver dollar, a 1913 Liberty Head nickel, and about 200 other pieces. My family has collected them for over a century. Mrs. Whitmore, these must be worth approximately $3.2 million, according to the last appraisal. And I'd like to donate them to the Stratford History Museum." The color drained from Arthur's face. "You want to donate them? All of them?" Eleanor nodded, sliding the manila envelope across the desk. I've already prepared the paperwork. The collection stays intact, displayed for educational purposes. My only conditions are that it be named the Whitmore Family Collection and that it remains accessible to the public, especially to students. Arthur's hands trembled. This could save the museum. That's precisely what I'm hoping for, Eleanor replied, watching him closely. These coins represent more than money to me. They're tangible pieces of history that deserve to be shared. Arthur stood suddenly, pacing. This changes everything. The city council couldn't possibly close us with an acquisition of this magnitude. We could renovate, create a proper display, update our security system. His eyes gleamed with possibilities, then a strange look crossed his face before he quickly composed himself. We'll need to keep this quiet until we have proper measures in place. You understand, of course. When do you think you might be able to display them? Eleanor asked. Oh, we'll need time to prepare a proper exhibit, Arthur said, suddenly all business. Security concerns, proper lighting, climate control, perhaps in 2 or 3 months. That long? Eleanor frowned. For a collection of this significance? Absolutely. Arthur was already filling out forms, his pen moving rapidly. Eleanor noticed how his eyes kept darting back to the coin case. There was something hungry in his gaze that hadn't been there before. After signing multiple documents and posing for a photo, Eleanor left the museum with mixed emotions. She felt lighter having fulfilled her mission, yet something nagged at her, a subtle shift in Arthur's behavior she couldn't quite place. The following week, a small article appeared in the town newspaper, praising Eleanor's donation and announcing the museum's new lease on life. Arthur was quoted calling her a true patron of history and an example of selfless dedication to cultural preservation. What the camera didn't capture in their handshake photo was the calculating look that had flashed in Arthur's eyes when he thought Eleanor wasn't watching, a look that would have told her everything she needed to know about the true fate awaiting her family's treasured collection. 6 weeks had passed since Eleanor's donation, and the local buzz about her generous gift had faded into the background of everyday town gossip. She'd received countless calls and cards from former students and community members, all praising her selflessness. But the person she hadn't heard from was Arthur Langley. Maybe he's just busy preparing the exhibit, her grandson Timothy suggested during Sunday dinner. The 12-year-old had been fascinated by her stories of the coin collection. Can we go see it soon, Grandma? Eleanor dabbed her lips with a napkin. That's what I intend to find out tomorrow. The next morning, Eleanor dressed in her favorite powder blue suit and took a taxi to the Stratford History Museum. Something felt different immediately. The weeds had been pulled from the flower beds, fresh mulch added, and the cracked steps appeared to be under repair. A banner hung across the entrance. Coming soon, major new exhibit! Curious, Eleanor pushed through the doors to find the foyer bustling with activity. A contractor measured the walls while a woman in a smart business suit directed workers installing new lighting fixtures. At the reception desk sat a young woman Eleanor didn't recognize. Her name tag read, Jackie Reynolds, Assistant Curator. Good morning, Eleanor said, leaning slightly on her cane. I'm here to see Arthur Langley. Jackie looked up, recognition flashing in her eyes. Mrs. Whitmore, it's an honor to meet you. I'm new here, just started last week. She gestured to the activity around them. All this is happening because of your incredible donation. Eleanor smiled, pleased to see the museum revitalized. Is Arthur available? I'd like to see how my collection is coming along. Something flickered across Jackie's face, hesitation, perhaps. Mr. Langley is in a meeting with the board, but I'd be happy to show you around. Wonderful. I'd especially like to see where the coin collection will be displayed. Jackie's smile faltered. The exhibit is still in development. Mr. Langley is very particular about getting it just right. I understand, but surely the coins themselves are here? I'd like to see how they're being stored until the exhibit opens. The young woman's discomfort became more evident. I believe they've been sent out for authentication and restoration. Standard procedure for acquisitions of this caliber. Eleanor's spine stiffened. All 200 coins? At once? That's hardly standard procedure, especially since they were already authenticated 3 years ago. I'm sorry, Mrs. Whitmore. I'm new here, so I don't know all the details. Jackie lowered her voice. But Mr. Langley should be done with his meeting soon if you'd like to wait. Eleanor nodded and settled onto a bench near the reception desk. The museum certainly looked different. Fresh paint covered the walls, and workers installed what appeared to be an advanced security system. Money was definitely flowing into the old building. After 40 minutes with no sign of Arthur, Eleanor approached Jackie again. I think I'll come back another day. Would you please tell Arthur I stopped by? Of course, Mrs. Whitmore. I'll let him know immediately. Instead of heading home, Eleanor made her way to the Stratford Daily Chronicle offices 3 blocks away. Tom Fitzgerald, the senior reporter who had covered her donation, was an old friend whose daughter had been one of Eleanor's favorite students. Eleanor! What brings you to our humble newsroom? Tom greeted her warmly. I need information, Tom. The museum seems to be undergoing quite a transformation, but my coins are nowhere to be found. Arthur claims they're out for authentication, but something feels wrong. Tom's journalistic instincts perked up. That is odd. Especially since the museum just received a substantial anonymous donation last week. Nearly $500,000. Eleanor's eyebrows shot up. Anonymous? That's quite a coincidence. Isn't it? Tom agreed, pulling up files on his computer. Arthur's been tight-lipped about it, which isn't like him. Usually, he'd be shouting from the rooftops about new funding. Eleanor tapped her cane thoughtfully. Tom, do you still have contacts at the auction houses? A few. Why? Could you ask if any rare American coins have come onto the market recently? Discreetly, of course. Tom nodded, understanding the implication. I'll make some calls. In the meantime, there's someone you should talk to. He scribbled a name and address on a notepad. Margaret Winters. She worked as the museum's collections manager until last month when Arthur suddenly let her go. That evening, Eleanor found herself sitting in Margaret Winters' modest living room. The former collections manager was a meticulous woman in her 60s with a precise manner of speaking. I was terminated without cause after 15 years, Margaret said bitterly. Arthur claimed budget cuts, but then I heard he hired Jackie the very next week. Did you ever see my coin collection? Eleanor asked. Margaret's expression darkened. Once. The day after you donated it. Arthur had me photograph and catalog each piece, saying he needed detailed records for insurance purposes. She hesitated. But there was something strange. He insisted I work after hours, with the museum closed. And then, 2 days later, he took the collection to his office and said he'd handle it personally from then on. A week after that, I was fired. Margaret leaned forward. Mrs. Whitmore, 3 days ago, I saw one of your coins, the 1913 Liberty Head nickel, in a catalog from Harrington's auction house in Boston. Eleanor's blood ran cold. Are you certain? Margaret nodded. I cataloged every coin in your collection. I'd recognize that piece anywhere. The next morning, Eleanor received a call from Tom. I've got something. A private collector in New York purchased an 1804 silver dollar last week for $780,000. The seller was anonymous, but my contact said the coin came with documentation tracing its provenance to a small museum collection in Massachusetts. Eleanor gripped the phone tightly. That's my father's prize coin. There's more, Tom continued. Apparently, several other rare coins have appeared on the market with similar provenance. The total sales already exceed $1 million. Eleanor thanked him and hung up, her hands shaking, not with age, but with rage. The betrayal was worse than she'd imagined. Arthur wasn't selling just 1 or 2 coins, he was systematically liquidating her entire collection while using her name to attract legitimate funding for the museum. So that's how he's playing this game, she murmured, reaching for her address book. It was time to call in reinforcements. Arthur Langley had no idea who he was dealing with. Eleanor stared at her reflection in the mirror, barely recognizing herself. Gone was her sensible cardigan and practical shoes, replaced by a designer pantsuit, statement jewelry, and a sleek silver wig cut in a fashionable bob. The transformation had cost a small fortune at the town's most exclusive boutique, but it was necessary for what she was about to do. "Mrs. Gardner, your car is waiting," said Melissa, who had finally come around to her mother's investigation after seeing the evidence Tom had gathered. She handed Eleanor a leather portfolio containing fabricated investment records and business cards for Elizabeth Gardner, private art collector. "Remember," Melissa warned, "if Arthur recognizes you." "He won't," Eleanor interrupted, applying another coat of burgundy lipstick, a shade she'd never worn in her life. "Arthur Langley sees what he expects to see. And he's certainly not expecting a 78-year-old schoolteacher to transform into a wealthy New York collector." The plan had come together within days. Tom's contact at Harrington's auction house had confirmed that another batch of rare coins was scheduled for a private showing that evening. The auction was invitation only, catering to elite collectors who preferred discretion over publicity. Eleanor's taxi arrived at the Four Seasons Hotel Boston just after 7. The hotel's ballroom had been transformed into an exclusive showroom, with display cases positioned strategically around the perimeter, and white-gloved staff offering champagne to guests. "Invitation, madam?" asked a stern-faced attendant at the entrance. Eleanor handed over the forged invitation Tom had procured through his less reputable contacts. "Elizabeth Gardner. I believe Mr. Harrington is expecting me." The attendant scanned a tablet, then nodded. "Welcome, Mrs. Gardner. Mr. Harrington mentioned you're interested in American numismatics. Only the exceptional pieces," Eleanor replied with practiced indifference, accepting a crystal flute of champagne. Heart pounding beneath her composed exterior, Eleanor circulated through the room, taking mental inventory of each display case. There, in the third case, she spotted them, 5 coins from her collection, including a 1922-piece dollar that her father had given her on her 16th birthday. "Beautiful specimens, aren't they?" said a voice behind her. Eleanor turned to find a distinguished man in his 60s. "Richard Harrington." He introduced himself, extending his hand. "I understand you've recently developed an interest in American coins." "The true masterpieces only," Eleanor replied. "These 5 are particularly captivating." "May I ask their provenance?" "A recently discovered private collection," Harrington answered smoothly. "The owner's family had them for generations but didn't realize their value until an expert assessment." Eleanor sipped her champagne to hide her clenched jaw. "How fortunate for you to secure them." "Indeed. Though I only broker the sales. The current owner has entrusted me with finding suitable buyers who appreciate their historical significance." He lowered his voice. "If you're seriously interested, I should mention there are more pieces becoming available in the coming months. The collection is being released gradually to avoid flooding the market." "How thoughtful," Eleanor said dryly. She discreetly activated the recording device hidden in her brooch, a spy gadget Timothy had ordered online with his allowance money. "I'd be very interested in meeting the seller. I find the stories behind collections often more fascinating than the pieces themselves." Harrington hesitated. "The seller prefers anonymity, but—" He studied her carefully. "I might arrange something, for a serious buyer with the right appreciation. I assure you, Mr. Harrington, my interest, and resources, are quite serious." By the end of the evening, Eleanor had secured Harrington's business card with a personal cell number written on the back, along with a promise to contact her when the next batch became available. More importantly, she had recorded evidence of 5 of her coins being offered for sale with falsified provenance. The next morning, Eleanor met Jackie Reynolds at a coffee shop 3 towns over, where they wouldn't be recognized. "I couldn't sleep after you showed me the evidence," Jackie confessed, her hands trembling around her mug. The young intern had been horrified to learn about Arthur's scheme. "I always thought the museum was about preserving history, not selling it off." "It was before Arthur saw an opportunity," Eleanor said. "What have you found?" Jackie slid a USB drive across the table. "Financial records from the museum's computer system." Arthur created a separate account that doesn't appear in the official books. Over $1 million has been deposited in the past month. And the withdrawals? That's the thing, only small amounts. He's stockpiling the money somewhere. Jackie hesitated. There's something else. I found emails between Arthur and collectors in Dubai, Tokyo, and Moscow, all interested in acquiring discreetly sourced American artifacts. He's not just selling to domestic buyers. Eleanor frowned. An international network makes this much more complicated. And dangerous, Jackie added. These aren't just ordinary collectors. Some of these people have connections to black market art trafficking. If they realize we're investigating, we need more concrete evidence linking Arthur directly to the sales. Eleanor mused. The recordings from the auction are compelling, but they don't specifically name him. Jackie nodded. I've been thinking about that. Arthur keeps a private calendar that only he can access. But twice now, I've noticed him meeting with a man who arrives in a black Bentley. The second time, I managed to photograph them together through the window. She pulled out her phone and showed Eleanor a slightly blurry photo of Arthur shaking hands with a tall, silver-haired man next to a luxury car. That's Vincent Caruso, Eleanor said, recognizing the man from the auction. He was at Harrington's last night, bidding on several items. The same Vincent Caruso who was investigated for antiquities smuggling 3 years ago. Jackie's eyes widened. The charges were dropped, but where there's smoke, there's fire, Eleanor finished. We need to find out when Arthur is meeting him next. Jackie bit her lip. There's one more thing you should know. The museum's board is holding a charity gala next month to reveal the newly authenticated Whitmore collection. Arthur has been telling everyone only selected pieces will be displayed while the rest remain in a vault for conservation purposes. Eleanor's expression hardened. Perfect. That gives us exactly 4 weeks to gather enough evidence to stop him before he sells the rest of my family's legacy. As she left the coffee shop, Eleanor didn't notice the black sedan parked across the street, or the man inside taking photographs of her and Jackie through a telephoto lens. Eleanor's living room had transformed into an impromptu investigation headquarters. Photos, documents, and timelines covered her dining table, while Jackie typed furiously on a laptop, correlating auction dates with Arthur's suspicious meetings. Look at this pattern, Jackie said, pointing to a spreadsheet. Every time Arthur meets with Caruso, rare coins appear at high-end auctions within 72 hours. Eleanor adjusted her reading glasses. And the buyers? Have we identified any? 5 so far, Jackie replied, pulling up a digital map marked with red pins across 3 continents. A hedge fund manager in Manhattan, an oil executive in Dubai, a tech billionaire in Tokyo, and this is interesting, a state senator's wife from our own state. Eleanor's eyebrows rose. Political connections. That explains how Arthur's operated without scrutiny. The doorbell rang, startling them both. Jackie quickly minimized the windows on her laptop while Eleanor peered through the peephole. It's Tom, she sighed with relief, letting the journalist in. Tom Fitzgerald looked haggard, his tie loosened and hair disheveled. I've been followed, he said without preamble. Black SUV, tinted windows. Twice yesterday, once today. Did you get a license plate? Jackie asked. Tried. It was covered with mud. Tom dropped a thick folder on the table. But I got something better. Remember that auction house assistant who tipped me off? She sent me these transaction records for every coin sold so far. Eleanor flipped through the papers, her face paling. 27 coins already gone. Nearly half my collection. And at these prices, Tom added, pointing to the figures, Arthur's made close to $2 million already. Jackie looked up from her laptop suddenly. Wait. If Arthur's selling internationally, he needs export permits. Those require thorough provenance documentation. Not if you're smuggling, Tom replied grimly. My source says the coins leave through diplomatic pouches or private jets, no customs checks. Eleanor sank into her armchair. We're not just dealing with fraud. This is organized crime. It gets worse, Tom said, lowering his voice. I did some digging into Caruso. He's not just some wealthy collector. 5 years ago, he was implicated in a scandal involving looted artifacts from Egyptian museums during the Arab Spring. Charges were dropped when witnesses suddenly recanted. Because they were threatened, Eleanor concluded. Or paid off, Jackie added. Either way, these aren't people who play by the rules. Tom nodded. Arthur's just a middleman in a much larger network. They use small museums and private collections as fronts to launder stolen or illegally exported artifacts. Eleanor's doorbell rang again. This time, no one was there, just a manila envelope on the welcome mat. Inside was a single Polaroid photograph of Eleanor, Jackie, and Tom at the coffee shop, with a handwritten message. Curiosity killed the cat. They know, Jackie whispered, her face ashen. We need to go to the police. With what? Eleanor asked. Circumstantial evidence and a vague threat? Arthur would spin it as a misunderstanding, claim the coins are simply being restored or authenticated. Without concrete proof linking him directly to the sales. We'd look like confused seniors and overzealous youths. Tom finished. No offense, Eleanor. None taken, she replied dryly. That night, after Tom and Jackie left, Eleanor discovered her house had been searched. Nothing was missing, but her files were slightly rearranged, and her computer showed signs of being accessed. More disturbingly, Timothy's school photograph had been moved from the mantel to her bedside table, a silent message that they knew about her family. The next morning, Eleanor arrived at the police station to find Detective Sarah Chen, a former student from 20 years ago. Mrs. Whitmore. Chen greeted her warmly before noticing Eleanor's troubled expression. What's wrong? In a private room, Eleanor explained the situation, presenting the evidence they'd gathered. Detective Chen listened attentively but frowned at the conclusion. I believe you, Mrs. Whitmore, but legally our hands are tied. You donated the collection without written restrictions on its use. Arthur could claim he's selling pieces to fund the museum's operations. Even with falsified provenance documents? That's stronger, but still difficult to prove intent. Chen tapped her pen thoughtfully. This network you've uncovered, if it's as widespread as you suggest, it would fall under FBI jurisdiction. How long would a federal investigation take? Months, at minimum. By then, your entire collection could be scattered across the globe. Eleanor straightened her spine. Then we don't have months. The charity gala is in 2 weeks. Detective Chen leaned forward. Mrs. Whitmore, please be careful. If these people are who you think they are, they won't hesitate to silence anyone threatening their operation. I taught high school for 40 years, Detective. I've faced scarier things than art thieves, Eleanor replied, though the bravado in her voice masked a deepening fear. Returning home, Eleanor found her front door slightly ajar. Heart pounding, she pushed it open to discover her living room in chaos. Furniture overturned, papers scattered, and scrawled across her wall in red marker. Stop now. Among the debris lay her family photo albums, deliberately destroyed, pages torn and photographs slashed. But the vandals had made a crucial mistake. In their haste to intimidate her, they'd left behind a burner phone, apparently dropped during the ransacking. Eleanor carefully picked it up with a tissue. The phone screen showed text messages arranging a meeting at the museum's storage facility that night, between Arthur and all his key contacts in the smuggling network. It was the proof they needed. It was also their last chance to stop Arthur before he disappeared with the remaining coins. Eleanor's hands trembled, not from fear but from resolve, as she dialed Jackie's number. The young intern answered on the first ring. I have a plan, Eleanor said without preamble. But we'll need to move quickly, and it will be dangerous. I'm in, Jackie replied without hesitation. What's the plan? The Stratford Museum glittered under spotlights as limousines and luxury cars pulled up to the entrance. The annual charity gala had been transformed into an extravagant unveiling of the Whitmore collection, with tickets selling for $500 apiece. Men in tuxedos and women in designer gowns sipped champagne as a string quartet played in the corner. Eleanor observed it all from across the street, sitting in Tom's weathered sedan with Jackie and Detective Chen. Remember, Detective Chin cautioned, adjusting her earpiece. We need concrete evidence of the illegal sales. Without that, this is just speculation. The recording device is embedded in my brooch, Eleanor said, touching the vintage silver piece fastened to her evening gown. Unlike her previous disguise, tonight she had chosen to come as herself, the respected retired teacher whose donation had supposedly saved the museum. And Jackie has synchronized her phone to receive the audio feed. I still think you should let me go in, Jackie protested. It's too dangerous for you. Eleanor patted the young woman's hand. Arthur would be suspicious of you after your sudden resignation. Besides, he's seen me as a harmless old woman from the beginning. That's his weakness, and we're going to exploit it. With a deep breath, Eleanor stepped out of the car, straightened her gown, and walked toward the museum entrance with the dignity of a woman who had nothing to fear. Mrs. Whitmore! Arthur exclaimed when she entered, his surprise quickly masked by a practiced smile. I wasn't sure you'd attend tonight. What a delightful surprise. I wouldn't miss the unveiling of my family's legacy, Arthur, Eleanor replied cordially, noting how his eyes darted nervously around the room. Though I admit, I've been concerned by the lack of updates. Ah, yes, Arthur guided her toward a less crowded corner. The authentication process was more complex than anticipated. But I'm pleased to announce we'll be displaying 12 of your most significant pieces tonight. Only 12? Eleanor raised an eyebrow. Out of over 200? Arthur's smile tightened. Conservation concerns. The rest are secured in our climate-controlled vault. He checked his watch surreptitiously. If you'll excuse me, I need to prepare for my speech. As Arthur moved away, Eleanor noticed several figures she recognized from their investigation. Vincent Caruso by the bar, the state senator and his wife near the display cases, and a Middle Eastern man she'd identified as the Dubai executive, examining the room's security layout with calculating eyes. All of the network's key players were present, just as they predicted. Eleanor circulated through the crowd, engaging in small talk while secretly photographing the attendees with a tiny camera disguised as a brooch pin. When she reached the display cases, her heart sank. Only the 12 least valuable coins from her collection were exhibited. The rest had likely already been sold or packaged for transport. At precisely 9 o'clock, Arthur tapped a glass for attention. Distinguished guests, it is my great honor to present the crown jewel of our museum, the Whitmore collection of rare American coins, graciously donated by our own Eleanor Whitmore. Applause filled the room as Arthur gestured toward Eleanor, who nodded graciously. Tonight we've selected 12 exquisite pieces for display, Arthur continued, representing the finest examples of American numismatic history. The remaining collection is being carefully preserved in our new state-of-the-art conservation facility. As Arthur droned on about the museum's commitment to historical preservation, Eleanor slipped away toward the administration wing. With the security staff focused on the main event, she easily accessed Arthur's office using the key card Jackie had duplicated before leaving her position. Inside, Eleanor moved quickly to Arthur's computer. Following Jackie's instructions, she inserted a flash drive that would copy all files while bypassing the password protection. As the program ran, she searched his desk, finding a hidden drawer containing international shipping manifests and private bank account statements showing deposits of millions. The flash drive beeped softly, indicating the download was complete. Eleanor pocketed it and the documents, then made her way back to the gala, arriving just as Arthur concluded his speech to enthusiastic applause. Quite moving, Arthur, Eleanor commented, approaching him as the crowd dispersed toward the exhibit. Though I couldn't help but notice the absence of the 1804 silver dollar that was my father's pride. Arthur's smile faltered. As I mentioned, many pieces require special conservation. Or perhaps, Eleanor interrupted quietly, it's difficult to display coins that have already been sold to private collectors. Arthur's face drained of color. I don't know what you're implying. I think you do. Eleanor subtly gestured toward Caruso and the other network members. Your associates certainly seem to understand the arrangement. Arthur grabbed her elbow, steering her forcefully toward a private alcove. You have no idea what you're talking about, he hissed, his charming facade crumbling. Don't I? Eleanor removed her arm from his grip. The 1913 Liberty Head nickel sold in New York. The 1794 flowing hair dollar to Dubai. The 1870s seeded Liberty dollar to Tokyo. Shall I continue? Shock registered on Arthur's face before his expression hardened. Even if that were true, you have no proof. And no one would believe an elderly woman's confused accusations against a respected museum director. Perhaps not, Eleanor conceded. But they might believe this. She revealed her brooch. Every word you've said tonight has been recorded, Arthur. Every threat, every implicit admission. Arthur lunged for the brooch, but Eleanor stepped back, bumping into someone. She turned to find Vincent Caruso standing there, his expression unreadable. Is there a problem? Caruso asked, his tone deceptively mild. No problem, Arthur stammered. Mrs. Whitmore was just leaving. Actually, Eleanor smiled. I was about to discuss with Mr. Caruso the interesting business arrangement you two have developed. I believe the FBI would find it fascinating as well. Arthur's face contorted with rage. You stupid old woman. Do you realize who you're dealing with? These people don't play by the rules of your quaint little town. Tell me more about these rule breakers. Eleanor prompted, the recording device capturing every word. Arthur, realizing his mistake, grabbed her arm again. This conversation is over. I believe that's my cue, announced a voice from behind. Detective Chen stepped forward, police badge displayed. Arthur Langley, you're under arrest for fraud, theft, and conspiracy to traffic stolen goods. As police officers emerged from various points around the room, the assembled collectors scattered, only to find the exits blocked by FBI agents who had been posing as wait staff. You set me up, Arthur snarled at Eleanor as he was handcuffed. No, Arthur, Eleanor replied calmly. You set yourself up the moment you decided my family's history was worth less than your greed. As Caruso and the other network members were escorted out, the gala guests watched in stunned silence. Eleanor stood tall amid the chaos, a triumphant guardian of her family's legacy, knowing the most difficult part was yet to come, recovering the coins that had already been sold across the globe. 6 months after Arthur Langley's arrest, the Stratford History Museum stood transformed. Gone were the cracked steps and weed-filled gardens, replaced by restored Victorian splendor and vibrant flower beds that welcomed visitors from across the country. Where once emptiness had echoed through its halls, now school groups and tourists filled the spaces with excited conversation. Eleanor Whitmore moved carefully through the bustling main gallery, her cane tapping lightly against the polished hardwood floors. The sensational story of her investigation had made national headlines. Retired teacher brings down international artifact smuggling ring. Donations had poured in after the scandal broke, but Eleanor took no personal credit. For her, the true victory was watching a group of fourth graders press their noses against the glass of the newly installed central exhibit, the Whitmore Family Collection. Mrs. Whitmore, the board members have arrived for the ceremony, said Jackie Reynolds, now the museum's official curator. The young woman had blossomed in her new role, bringing fresh ideas and technological innovations that had revitalized the century-old institution. How many coins did the FBI recover in total? Eleanor asked as they walked toward the administrative wing. 143 so far, Jackie replied. They're still tracking down 28 pieces sold to collectors who claim they purchased them in good faith. Eleanor nodded, a mix of satisfaction and resignation in her expression. Not everything had been recovered, but it was far better than she had feared. The international scope of Arthur's network had been shocking, spanning 12 countries and involving over 30 wealthy collectors and corrupt officials. Arthur himself had received a 15-year sentence after prosecutors discovered his operation extended far beyond Eleanor's coins to include stolen artifacts from small museums across 3 states. The Foundation representative is quite impressed with your security upgrades, Eleanor commented as they passed a discreet but sophisticated surveillance system. Jackie smiled. The Hartwell Historical Foundation grant covered everything we proposed. Their 5-year commitment means we can finally expand our educational programs too. They entered the boardroom where the museum's newly appointed directors waited. No longer comprised of Arthur's cronies, the board now included respected academics, community leaders, and 2 former FBI art crime specialists. At the head of the table sat Margaret Winters, reinstated as collections manager with a substantial raise and apology. "Eleanor," greeted Dr. Sofia Ramirez, the museum's new director. "We were just discussing the final terms of your donation agreement." The revised agreement lay before them, 12 pages of legally binding conditions that would prevent any future exploitation of the collection. Eleanor had insisted on complete transparency, regular audits, and a clause requiring any deaccessioning decisions to receive unanimous board approval plus confirmation from an independent ethics committee. "Before we sign," Eleanor said, settling into her chair, "I want to ensure we're all clear on my vision for this collection." The room fell silent, respectful of the woman whose determination had saved not just her family's legacy, but the museum itself. "These coins are more than metal and monetary value. They're tangible connections to our shared history," Eleanor continued. "Every child who visits should leave understanding that the past isn't locked away in display cases. It's alive in the stories we preserve and the lessons we learn." "We couldn't agree more," Dr. Ramirez replied, sliding the agreement toward Eleanor. "Which is why we've established the Eleanor Whitmore Educational Endowment with part of the Hartwell Grant. It will fund free admission for all school groups and history workshops for underserved communities." Eleanor signed the document with a steady hand, then passed it around the table. As each signature was added, she felt a weight lifting from her shoulders, a promise fulfilled to her father, grandfather, and all the Whitmores who had safeguarded these historical treasures. After the meeting, Jackie guided Eleanor to the museum's grand entrance where a small crowd had gathered for the unveiling of a new plaque. Eleanor's grandson Timothy stood proudly at the front, now 13 and wearing his first suit for the occasion. "Grandma," he called out, rushing to her side. "Did you see the interactive display in the education center? They used my coin identification app idea." Eleanor squeezed his hand. "I did. Your great-grandfather would be so proud to see how you're carrying on the family's passion for history." Dr. Ramirez stepped forward, signaling for attention. "Today marks a new chapter for the Stratford History Museum. Thanks to Eleanor Whitmore's extraordinary generosity and courage, this institution has been reborn as a center for historical preservation, education, and integrity." She pulled a cord, revealing a bronze plaque beside the entrance. "The Whitmore Wing of American History, where our past secures our future." Applause erupted as Eleanor blinked back tears. Standing there, surrounded by community members who valued preservation over profit, she knew her decision to donate rather than sell had been vindicated. Later that afternoon, when the ceremonies concluded and the crowds thinned, Eleanor found herself alone in the coin gallery. The displays were artfully arranged, each piece accompanied by detailed historical context and educational materials. In the center, a touchscreen allowed visitors to explore the collection's history, including its near loss and dramatic recovery. A small group of children entered, led by a young teacher who seemed barely out of college herself. "This collection," the teacher explained, "was saved by one person who believed history belongs to everyone, not just to those who can afford it." A little girl raised her hand. "Who was that person?" "Her name is Eleanor Whitmore," the teacher replied. "She was a teacher, just like me, who understood that some things are worth more than money." Eleanor smiled to herself and slipped quietly away, leaving the children to discover the treasures on their own. As she walked through the museum's gardens, she knew that long after the coins had tarnished and her own name was forgotten, the legacy of preserving history for future generations would endure. In that moment, she could almost hear her father's voice. "Well done, Eleanor. Well done indeed."